please give a warm welcome to our guest speaker tonight, Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
The freedom of speech and opinion that we enjoy here tonight is far from certain at too many American college campuses, and that exacts a grave toll on our nation. The battle is on to turn this threat back, and ACT is fighting that battle every day. Please support our mission. I've taken the opportunity, indeed the liberty, of putting literature on the back table that will tell you how you could join one of our donor societies. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ayaan Hirsi Ali. It's a great honor to introduce her. She is, to cite the book of Proverbs, a woman of valor. Her courage and dedication to freedom summon us to defend the values of the West. Escaping in 1992 from the domination of fundamentalist Islam and an impending forced marriage, she fled to the Netherlands, obtained political asylum, and 11 years later was elected to Parliament. She worked with Theo van Gogh on a film that exposed and criticized the treatment of women in Islam. His brutal assassination by a Muslim terrorist did not deter her advocacy for the rights of women in the Islamic world. The list of awards that she has won for her defense of liberty and women's rights is very long. It includes joining Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential persons in the world. We're very fortunate to have this woman of valor and the board of her foundation with us today. And after our presentation, not surprisingly, she has kindly agreed to answer your questions. Please join me in welcoming Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rabbi Shiner. I am absolutely grateful and delighted and privileged to be here tonight among friends, good friends, longtime friends, and new friends, but also among like-minded people. I was a Muslim who came to the West in 1992 and assimilated. My response to 9/11 and the threat of Islamism was very different from the responses of many Western leaders over the years. I lost my Muslim faith and recognized the challenge Islamism posed to Western institutions and values. While Western political leaders, mired in the ideology of multiculturalism, failed to address the threat adequately. More than 2 decades after 9/11, we see massive demonstrations on the streets of Europe and the United States in favor of the anti-Semitic, genocidal, Islamist butchers of Hamas. We see 3 presidents of the most renowned universities in the United States, Harvard, Penn, and MIT, testify before Congress and refuse to say that calling for the destruction of Israel and genocide against the Jews violates campus rules, hiding behind the studied talking point that it depends on the context. We see in the United States anti-Semitic incidents go up by 400%. This number is from a report published on October 25, so I assume that it's actually much more. How on earth did this happen? What's the solution to this moral and intellectual rot? Many of you might be familiar with my story, so I'll keep it as brief and to the point as possible. But I think it offers some perspective on our current predicament. I was born in Somalia. I spent my formative years there and in Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. I was part of a clan culture where the bloodline mattered above everything else. My clan uncles were there to help us out with schooling, food, and money wherever we went. There was no escape from the clan, which was also in many ways a microcosm of Islam, the dominant religion of Somalia. Many of the clan rules, especially for women, were the same as men, and sometimes they were drawn from the strictures of Islam. The clan network helped my family to survive. My father, an anti-government dissident, relied on them for support, and the clan was at times generous and hospitable, and at times vicious and brutal, especially where the unwritten code of honor was violated. This was the case for girls. I was raised as a Muslim girl. I attended Quran school, and according to the values of my clan and my religion, I carried out the back-breaking domestic labor. Girls and women are there for marriage, for breeding, and for household chores and nothing else. Girls were seen as problems. My grandmother had a single son and 10 daughters. Do you know how she described them? She used to say quite openly, "I have one son and 10 problems." Girls were a burden, and the misogynistic culture of the clan and Islam was enforced by women as much as it was enforced by men. I, like the majority of other Somali girls, underwent female genital mutilation, or purification as it was described. That should tell you all you need to know about the status of women in my native society. Clan life based on Islam was a life of violence. I was beaten constantly as a child, and for many years, I thought that this was normal. Death was also normal. People died all the time of violence and of disease. From Allah we come and to Allah we return was a phrase I heard constantly. To this day, when filling out medical forms that ask about my family history of cancer and such things, I find myself unable to answer. Death was such a common occurrence in my early years that we barely bothered to inquire into its causes. When I was a teenager, living with my family in Kenya, along came the Muslim Brotherhood, incidentally, the Islamist group that spawned Hamas. The Brotherhood offered something more. It offered a life of service to Allah. I felt a glorious purpose. We had a mission to convert people to the true Islam. There was intellectual nourishment, or at least that's what I thought, because we were required to study the Quran and the Hadith. We were a community, a true brotherhood, united with a divine purpose. And Islamism went further than the passivity in the face of death that I had grown up with. It embraced death. To die for Allah was the most wonderful thing I could imagine at that age. I would be guaranteed a place in paradise. It was through clan life, the Muslim Brotherhood, and my Islamic schooling that I became an anti-Semite. The worst insult in the Somali community was to be called a Jew. Not that any of us actually knew one. To be called a Jew was so abhorrent, some felt justified in killing anyone who so dishonored them with this slur. I vividly remember sitting with my female fellows in mosques, cursing Israel and praying Allah to destroy them. We were certainly not interested in a peaceful two-state solution. We were taught to want to see Israel wiped off the map. the elimination of Israel was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. For us as Muslims, Israel did not represent a territorial dispute. To want Israel's destruction was an act of worship. To entertain notions of a two-state solution was an act of sin, a transgression, a betrayal of God, His Prophet, and the Ummah. When I was 16, my teacher of religion was Sister Aziza. She read to us the Quran's lurid descriptions of the everlasting fire that burns flesh and dissolves skin, the place preserved for Jews, their eternal home where they belong. Our religious teachers described Jews as physically monstrous, with horns coming from their heads, out of which flew devils that would corrupt the world. Jews controlled everything. They told us, and it was the duty of Muslims to destroy them. We made no distinction between liberal and Orthodox Jews, or between Jews who settled Palestine and those who opposed the settlements, between religious or atheist Jews. We also made no distinction between adult Jews and children, male, female, mothers, old and young. To us, Jews were Jews, all of them evil and all of them enemies of Islam and all that's good, true, and decent. Our mission was to single-mindedly destroy them through prayer, through propaganda, and for those lucky enough to have the means, to kill them. It was a lot to take in for a teenager who read Western romance novels in secret. But to my shame, I believed those things. Much later, I fled to the Netherlands to escape a marriage arranged by my father to a man in Canada. Looking back, I recalled the violence, hatred, and discord of the societies I had grown up in. I was shocked by my new home in Holland. It was radically different from anything I had known. Here in Holland, there was a separation between religion and politics. Women had equal rights and could live independently and make their own choices. There was a concept of the common good that I had never known before. There was no talk of death, no enemies to fight or pray against, and no bloodline or religion that could only be defended by waging war. The more I understood about this new society, the more I liked it and admired it. I assimilated. I lived life as a Dutch woman, suppressing the dissonance I felt at betraying my religion and upbringing. I abandoned the ideas of Islamism, and I educated myself on anti-Semitism. But then 9/11/2001 happened, and Osama bin Laden was frank about his motivation. He despised the West. This forced me into a crisis of belief, and I had no other choice but to leave Islam, to be fully intellectually honest with myself. As I became more and more involved in politics and activism, I watched with great interest and even greater dismay as Western leaders responded to Islamism. They chose to believe that bin Laden and his Islamist ilk did not mean what they said. They chose to believe that multiculturalism was the solution. But I saw that multiculturalism was really an embrace of clanism and primitivism. It segregated Muslim immigrants into ghettos and allowed them to subject women to arranged marriages, Sharia law, and other abuses. Another baffling Western response was to engage with nations such as Saudi Arabia and Pakistan to help them assimilate their Muslim immigrants. The Netherlands and other European countries asked them to help deal with Islamist terror, Yet, Saudi Arabia was for many years the world's biggest funder of Dawa, that is, Islamist proselytization. Domestically, Western leaders listened to Islamist infiltrators with an agenda, whom they naively saw as moderate representatives of Muslim communities. When asked about how to integrate Muslims in the West, these so-called community leaders unsurprisingly demanded separate Muslim schools, separate media platforms, separate courts, and a victim status to be protected from Islamophobia. In other words, the more the West tried to appease and collaborate with Islamism, the more the Islamists rewarded them with aggression and terror. And yet, they kept on with these wrong-headed approaches to the problem. When I left Holland for the United States in 2006, I hoped that America had learned from European failures. America did a better job of hunting down and destroying terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But America barely understands the concept of Dawa, or the web of Islamist outreach, propaganda, and web of charities that end up financing Hamas and other terrorist networks. America also fails to deter the Islamist regime of Iran, having bought into the false posturing of that regime to enter into negotiations to stop its nuclear program. Now, on the internet and on Western soil, Islamist networks of recruitment and funding are entrenched. As Sam Westrop of Focus on Western Islamism has recently discovered, over $260 million are sent through the 501c system to Hamas-aligned charities in the United States, provided by corporate foundations, employee giving schemes, partisan community groups, and a powerful array of Islamist grant-making foundations that make use of a largely unregulated nonprofit sector. $260 million. Just think about what Hamas is doing with that. It's shameful that this is allowed, and all because Western leaders fail to understand the true nature of Islamism and failed to understand it more than 20 years ago. To return to Holland, I recently co-wrote an article for the Free Press, very wise, with my long-term Dutch friend, Evelyn Marcus, about how Islamism has poisoned what was once a great nation. Here are a few examples. During the Second Intifada in Israel, which began in 2000, Muslim immigrants from Morocco and other North African countries started beating up Jews in Amsterdam and elsewhere in Europe out of quote-unquote solidarity with Palestinians. Some of our friends were attacked. Week after week, stones were thrown at Jews on their way to synagogue. Yet, these crimes barely made the news. Another example, in the years after it was commonplace to hear Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the Gaza, chanted in the soccer stadiums by thousands of fans, some of them Moroccan Muslim immigrant kids, during the 2 minutes of silence in commemoration of those who were killed in World War II. Another example, Jew and Cancer Jew became popular slurs on the streets of Amsterdam, not Mogadishu, but Amsterdam. This sort of thing is now common, not only in Europe, but also in the United States. Witness the shocking mob attack last Sunday on Goldie's, a restaurant in Philadelphia owned by the Israeli chef Michael Solomonov. How did we get here? And is there hope for the future? In election after election, Western elites have reasserted their commitment to multiculturalism. And even when some leaders, for example, the former UK Prime Minister David Cameron, the former Chancellor Angela Merkel, Even when they dissented from this view, they never followed up with action. They did not pursue aggressive programs of assimilation, nor did they reform immigration. Things just kept going on as before. However, ordinary working and lower middle class people, on whom the burden of multiculturalism ultimately falls, have finally rebelled against the establishment. As Geert Wilders' shocking victory in Holland has shown, I shall stick with Holland as an example. While political and media leaders told the public that opposing migration was xenophobic, ordinary people noticed structural changes in their country and felt that they hadn't been adequately consulted. In the 1960s, 60,000 Muslims lived in the Netherlands. Today, there are around 1.2 million. Now, the 1.2 million is the official number, and I will tell you to take official numbers with a very large grain of salt. But let's give them the 1.2 million. This is thanks to a chain migration, asylum, and a higher birth rate. Do you know how many Jews live in the Netherlands? It's less than 50,000. While political elites told the public to be tolerant of Islam, in keeping with a long-standing tradition of religious tolerance, ordinary people saw that Islamists were increasingly well-entrenched in the country, a point even made by Dutch intelligence officials. The post-October 7 pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Dutch streets, which, as elsewhere, were sometimes violent, may have been the final straw that led to Wilders' landslide victory. He was polling at about 12 seats on October 6, and after the election, he got 37 seats in a parliament of 150. It's worth noting that Wilders' voters do not fit a crude stereotype. He won the most votes of any party among voters between the ages of 18 and 35. So perhaps there is hope. Ordinary people are resisting the old mainstream liberal consensus, and perhaps the old elites will start listening. No longer, when voters complain about immigrant ghettos where women are effectively enslaved, or about their community and sports centers being turned into Islamist headquarters, will politicians be able to dismiss them as racist. No longer will they be able to repeat mindlessly the mantras of toleration and multiculturalism. They used to say integration is a two-way street. At least I hope this will be the case. The demographic crisis noted above is a worry. I fear that Bernard Lewis's prediction of a majority Muslim Europe by 2050 might still materialize. If it does, the Islamists will rejoice, for they have entrenched themselves so deeply and so widely that their vision for Europe will be the one that's adopted. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, a famous Islamist preacher in Qatar, he predicted, "We will conquer Europe, we will conquer America, not through sword, but through Dawa." Meanwhile, Western societies are still torturing themselves over their supposedly irredeemable evil histories. The woke revolutionaries who have infiltrated all of our institutions want to tear down what has taken centuries to build. Because of this creeping cultural suicide, the West is in no position to resist the threat of Islamism. Instead, barely 80 years after the Holocaust, we allow anti-Semitic, genocidal thugs and their apologists free rein on our streets. Bin Laden must be smiling in his water grave as Gen Z TikTokers idiotically praise his evil rantings. The only solution is to sound the alarm and to restate the Judeo-Christian Western values that have benefited us all so much. We must be loud in speaking up against the wrong-headedness of the policies of our elites. We must be proud of our heritage, and we must champion it. We must show Gen Z that the world would be a dystopia if the Islamists won. We must show them that the world built by Western values over the centuries is infinitely superior to the hellish visions of the Islamists. We must also elect leaders who understand the existential crisis faced by the West and who are willing to act to address it. In short, we must fight for our values wholeheartedly and unashamedly. Only then will we have a chance of saving the West. I have seen the alternatives to our society. I have lived in that Islamist dystopia, and I do not wish to see our society make the same terrible mistakes. The wonderful societies I found in 1992, which immeasurably improved my life, seem to be vanishing before our very eyes. Let's act before it's too late. Thank you. Thank you. You don't have to do that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. We're now going to take some questions and answers. So if you have a question, just feel free to raise your hand.
Hi, Ayaan. The last time I heard you speak in person was in 2007 at the Atheist Alliance International Conference in Washington, D.C. You spoke alongside of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris. Yeah. And you considered yourself an atheist. Now, a week or two ago, we learned that you no longer consider yourself an atheist, that you are a Christian. And your article dealing with that was a bit vague. It was sort of hard for us atheists to understand exactly, atheist, 100% Ashkenazi Jew, 100% atheist, 100% atheist, okay. Nevertheless, it was hard for us to understand exactly what you were adopting of the Christian religion, the supernatural aspects of it. Can you go into a little more detail of what you really believe about the Christian religion and about Jesus?
Thank you for that question, and you're absolutely right. In 2007, I was with Hitchens and Dawkins and Dennett and Sam Harris, and I was promoting atheism, and I can explain my part in that. I was reacting to the religion in which I was raised, and at that point, I preferred atheism. As I evolved and lived and went through personal growth and growing pains, I have come to realize that I have spiritual needs. And the article was vague because it's not clearly defined to me exactly. I can't give you the clarity you're seeking because I don't have that clarity myself. But one thing that I'm clear on is that atheism and the core of atheism is in the end nihilistic. And I think again, it's about intellectual honesty that many of these prominent atheists did not acknowledge the tribute that the Judeo-Christian values and the institutions that are born out of those values have achieved. And I think we're in a place now where we are in the crisis that we are in because we've departed from those institutions and from those values, from those Judeo-Christian values, which are very distinct. Which are very distinct from religion in general, very distinct from the religion of Islam, very distinct from the religion of Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. These Judeo-Christian faith and the history and that trajectory of many centuries has given us what we have, and I think the sooner we acknowledge that, the sooner we can climb out of this spiritual hole that we've gotten ourselves into.
Thank you for your presentation. What differentiates you compared to many new Muslims in the New World, like in Ilhan Omar, or young generations who are already growing here and they still are not assimilating and are full of hate? And how can you explain it in a way that hopefully will move some of them to the right place?
I think what distinguishes me from, let me first start by saying I'm not the only one who made this transition. There are so many Muslims from the Middle East and South Asia and Africa who have come to America and come to European countries and are full of gratitude for what they have found here and mean absolutely no harm at all. But, and this is why I make this distinction between general Muslims and the Islamists with a political agenda who want to destroy us. But I think the main distinction is I've been forced, I have gone through that dissonance of wanting to reconcile being a Muslim with being an independent woman and having an independent mind of my own. And I don't know how the others do it, but I couldn't do it. And I still have to go through the question that you asked just now, what exactly is my moral framework? What do I've got this, I just have this need for this clarity. But I also can't close my eyes to clanism and tribalism and Islamism and pretend that there's something there that we are not seeing, something valuable, and come to the West, partake of only the material and economic fruits, and just say, but the principles and the values, those don't matter. I think that's the main distinction, and what also I think distinguishes me from, as I explained in the speech, is I was once a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and I know what those values, I know what they're all about. And I think the message of death is a message I completely reject. I have come to embrace Western values because it's about this Judeo-Christian values that I just discussed. It's a message of life, and it's trying to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number of people and build institutions that reach to that. I'm also impressed more than anything, for instance, about how Westerners can get worked up, not only about human rights, but about animal rights. And the environment, I think this is, in terms of moral progress, these are huge steps, and you can't just sidestep them and say, we Muslims, we also like animals. Yeah, we like to eat them, but we don't protect them. Yeah.
It sounds like, to me, that Islam is incompatible with pluralistic societies. Are we doomed to warfare between pluralistic democracies and Islam?
We're not doomed if we fight. I think that the problem, the reason why we are where we are is not because the message of radical Islam is any different or better today than it was in 1979. The reason why we are where we are is because we decided to abandon our own values. And we had a red line. In 2001, when 9/11 happened, I remember that there was a clear moral consensus that what happened was wrong. There was no ifs, no buts. And now, only 20 years later, on the most privileged campuses, that's where you go for knowledge and wisdom, Harvard, Penn, Yale, Brown, and so on, they're saying, yeah, well, there is Islamophobia and there's anti-Semitism, and they're equally the same. That's not something they did to us. That's something we did to ourselves. Yeah.
Hi, Ms. Hirsi Ali. Thanks for coming. I had a question about Geert Wilders. I know that you worked with him. You, I believe, served in Parliament with him. And I was wondering, just like with his performance in the election, if you could just give us some insight on, maybe politically, if you could, like maybe the strength of Mr. Wilders, a weakness, and maybe some advice for him as far as governing and, you know, like going up against the entrenched establishment, which you talked about.
So on Geert Wilders, on a personal level, I haven't seen him or spoken to him since 2006 when I left the Netherlands. And I think over the years, he has learned quite a lot. I think right now he's the most experienced member of parliament in the Netherlands. His strengths are that he is a hard worker, he's very ethical, he is committed. His weaknesses are that he has some policy propositions for which he'll never find a majority, but not only that, that makes it very easy for his enemies to pigeonhole him as a white supremacist and as an extremist. Those are his weaknesses, but I think he has learned over that. And in this latest cycle of elections, he's been given the nickname, not Geert Wilders, but Geert Milders, because he distanced himself from some of the propositions that he was taking, like banning the Quran and deporting all Muslims from the Netherlands, and he had a few other wild suggestions. But I think the biggest challenge for him is to work in a system of coalitions. Yes, he has the largest party, but he has to work with the other parties to form a majority to govern, and some of the others have made it very clear that they don't want to do that and that they want to frustrate that. The bureaucracy, the civil service, many of them want to frustrate that. So he has huge challenges. It's not a given that he's going to govern and that he's going to see his agenda implemented, even the most moderate bits of it. But that is the nature of politics in the Netherlands, and he knows it more than anyone else.
Hi. Hi, Ms. Ali.
Sorry. Yeah, she's had her hand for so long. Yeah, okay, go on.
2 questions. I've been reading your pamphlet, Preserving the Values of the West, and you write that university is a place where knowledge is imparted to students, and students hone their critical thinking skills so they're able to discern what is true from what is false. Yeah. But you just said we've created it. But what the media is saying is that even before October 7th happened, all literature and information was disseminated to the American colleges. So if that's true, did we create it? But really more importantly, how can we stop it? And in the same vein, you were indoctrinated to be an anti-Semite as a child, and it's still happening in the classrooms, in the textbooks. The Holocaust is no longer taught in Arabic countries. How can we prevent this current generation from continuing to be anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli?
Yeah. So the university bit, that is the easy bit. From, I would say, since the 1960s, there were forces that were active on university campuses and that saw university campuses as a place of engaging in politics and transforming young, impressionable minds into the kids that go to university. Eventually, they're going to be the elites of our society. They're going to take leadership positions. And these radical left Marxist groups that were active on university campuses, they saw the opportunity to indoctrinate rather than educate. And when I say we allowed for that to happen, there's been a great deal of writing that was, criticizing and alerting the wider public to what was going on campuses and the decline in education, the decline in critical thinking, the politicization, the removal of classical texts. All of this was going on. I think it just happened at a very fast pace since the last decade, maybe decade and a half. When I say we did this to ourselves, what I mean by that is it's not some external force that came from the outside. It's not the Islamists that have corrupted our universities. We did it ourselves. The indoctrination, I was indoctrinated in the mosque and at school, in the neighborhood. They were people who were dressed up as good people. They came to talk to us at first about charity and about being a good Muslim, about helping others. It's only later on that all the hate and the death was pasted onto this. And I think the more we find out, the more we learn about who they are and how they operate and the platforms that they use. They have online on top of everything that they had. The internet is now their tools. I think that gives us the opportunity to name them, identify them, shame them, develop a counter-narrative, and then put an effort into educating young minds, whether it's on TikTok, on university campus, or from K to 12, so that our kids know what critical thinking is and that they can independently discern these things. When you're told to hate Jews, I didn't have that independence as a teenager. I didn't have the alternative message to say, what these people are telling you, you should take that maybe to a parent or to someone else, maybe put question marks on what you're being taught. I swallowed it whole. And I want to point out there should be a difference between growing up in Nairobi, Kenya, and going to school in Massachusetts. There should be, I mean, we always say, let's address these issues through education. This is what's going on in the education system. It's in the education system that our kids are being indoctrinated, not educated. And I think it's something we stand up to. Yeah.
I want to stay on the American university. I imagine in this room there's many people who are very supportive of their alma maters. And given the juncture we're at, all that you shared, all that people are reading about what's going on at campuses, when individuals are speaking with leadership at their university and talking about support, what are things that individuals should ask for, demand, in order for them to continue to support at this point?
So I think, first of all, let's recognize the scale and the intensity of this problem. Right after these demonstrations, protests started to happen on campuses, some big donors came out and said, okay, we're not going to give to Harvard, we're not going to give to Penn. In Stanford, there was a faculty member who was asking Jewish students to stand in a corner. The discussion that followed was, he should be fired. And I don't think that's enough. I don't think it's enough to, say, withdraw a donation from one university or fire one rogue faculty member. I think the first thing is to acknowledge just how bad the rot is. I think that the leadership, whether they are donors, alumni, get together and let's do an audit. What on earth is going on in these institutions? And one question, for instance, why are there more administrators on campus than students? There are so many questions that we need to answer about our education system, and it is something that has to happen over a long time, a granular audit of what on earth is going on in these institutions, and then correct accordingly. Otherwise, we're going to be played one against the other. And before you know it, and I think when it comes to the information warfare, the other side is winning, because in America today, it's perfectly normal to make an equivalence between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. That's where we are, and we've got to roll that back. If we can sell Coca-Cola, a brown, sugary drink, to the whole world, surely we can sell the most important principles to our own citizens. Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry, a woman speaks. Thank you so much for your presentation. What I want to ask you is, when you were with the Klan, when you were growing up, who came to support the women, Muslim women, who were going through what you were going through? And I take pause, and we're all so disappointed in the reaction, or no reaction, and no commentary by all the women's organizations, left wing, who haven't said one thing and who are hemming and hawing in support of Israeli women who have been suffering the most horrendous torture, and nobody can spit it out. And I take pause because you went through these things as well. Was there anybody out there for you? Were you supported at that time when everyone was? So I'd like to hear your take on that, please.
I can never pretend that I went through what the young women went through on the 7th of October. That was rape as warfare, and that was designed to hurt the Jewish community and hurt deep and over a long period of time. And in the mentality of the honor and shame, women were raped and mutilated and harmed the way they were done to shame, to drive the sword of shame right through Jewish communities. That was the message. When I was growing up in a clan setting, no one came from the outside to help. And the people on the inside didn't understand that they were doing anything wrong. They were simply living according to their customs. Female genital mutilation is something that is done to 98% of girls in Somalia. These are numbers that are presented by the United Nations, 98% of Egyptians, Sudanese, and so on. This is people living according to their customs and their traditions. But I was lucky enough to have been sent to school and to read books and to find out that there was a life out there that was different from ours. Reading Nancy Drew meant, there was this independent woman who was solving mysteries. And you can get lost in a book, almost like a drug, to escape reality. And that, for me, as a teenager, reading these Western books was escapism. And when I went to the Netherlands, to university, the minds that emancipated me, other than obviously what was around me, I was surrounded by all these independent-minded people and women, and I wanted to be like them, but to understand the history behind the emancipation of women. I was reading John Stuart Mill's On the Subjection of Women. So to a certain point, I don't think I have been corrupted by the radical feminists of today who are active on campuses, man-hating, and who believe in all sorts of crazy ideas that, to me, are not feminist, and in many ways are anti-feminist. So I've been incredibly lucky. I've been incredibly lucky, and I feel obliged to speak out and to share what I think I have, and to preserve what I think I have.
Thank you. Your story is fascinating. Can you share a little more about us? How did you escape? Why the Netherlands? Do you have a family? Have you ever experienced discrimination yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I've written all of this. I've written all the answers, most of the answers to these questions in a book called Infidel. But I escaped the forced marriage. I was on my way to Canada. This is in 1992, July. And I went to the Netherlands because I had a travel document that gave me, with a visa stamped on it, and the visa gave me access to Germany and 4 other countries, and the Netherlands was the country next to Germany, and so it was convenient. I didn't choose it for any other reason other than that it was convenient. And I was very lucky to have gone there and to have started my life there. I have a family now. I'm married. I have 2 little boys, I'm now, thoroughly westernized. Yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up in a tribal setting as a girl, so yes, I experienced in the Western world. No, and I don't know if I would know it if it hit me in the head, because the way these words, racism and white supremacy, are used in ways that no longer make any meaning. They make no more sense. So if somebody at the airport is upset with me, is that a white supremacist, or is it just someone who's being a jerk? I honestly, my answer would be I don't think I have experienced racism or discrimination. I tell an anecdote of when I was on a train in the Netherlands, and there were two skinhead boys sitting next to me, and they were speaking in Dutch. And I think once they realized that I understood what I was saying, they seemed to be very embarrassed about what they were saying. So that was the extent of racism that I overheard. But not something directed at me. I don't think I've ever been denied a right or a privilege that I share with everyone else on the grounds of race in the Netherlands or in America. Yeah.
There are no doubt many Muslims in the West living legally in the countries in which they reside, following the laws, but nevertheless devoted to the overthrow of Western values. How do we deal with that? I have seen discussions that they quietly feel they will win the demographic battle, and then legally, democratically proceed to take over the West. How should we think about that?
Well, first of all, that's happening because you have to go to certain neighborhoods in places like Sweden, France, parts of Germany, Italy, to see that this sort of replacement has occurred. And if you go to these places, there is an informal law, a parallel society. So how do we deal with it? That's the big head scratcher. I am a classical liberal. I do not believe in forcing people, rounding people up and forcing them out of the country. In many cases, even that's impossible because they are citizens who are born in these countries and raised in these countries. So I think the only options that we are left with are the options of developing a counter-narrative and a counter-propaganda and being just as active as they are, with the hope and the optimism that our ideas are in many ways more attractive than what people are hearing in the mosques today in France or in England or in New York and Michigan. And we're not doing that. And we're not doing it, and here's where this whole multiculturalism thing comes along. Today, to go forward and say, we're going to have Western civilization taught uniformly on all K to 12, regardless of where you come from, you're going to go through Western civilization, or you're going to go through the history of the Holocaust. To do that, you're going to face opposition from the woke people who are saying you are imposing your white supremacist ideas on these ethnic groups. That's also a fight we have to fight, but that is the nature of multiculturalism. Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for being so brave and speaking the truth. I hope you can influence many young Muslim ladies. In your opinion, why is Gaza so isolated in the Muslim world? I see them protesting all over the world. I haven't seen one soldier come from Indonesia to help them. That's my first question, why they're so isolated. The second one, in your opinion, why the Israeli Arabs, the citizens of Israel, are so quiet, supporting Israel actually, and are not willing to fight, not to help Gaza? Could you answer those two questions, please?
I cannot answer the second one. I can't even attempt to answer that second one. On the first one, why are so many, there are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, why are they not volunteering to go and fight in Gaza? I think that if you look into Islamist literature, what you're going to find is that the inhabitants of Gaza are seen not as human beings, and this is again where embracing death comes into the narrative. They are martyrs. They are considered to be the lucky ones who are, to be killed by the Jews, you go straight to paradise. It's the people of Gaza who have been, you are a baby born in Gaza, and the likelihood of being indoctrinated with the idea that you're going to die killing Jews, that is your fate. You have to ask the question, why is it that Egypt, if Egypt were given a lot of money, Israel, the Israeli government is saying, evacuate, get the people of Gaza out. In terms of money, I think we can afford to, the countries that support the mission to destroy Hamas, they can put the money down. All that Egypt has to do is to say, we're going to help evacuate the residents of Gaza, let Hamas be cleared out, and then we can start talking about what to do about that. But the government of Egypt is not going to do that because, as the president of Egypt said, that would kill the Palestinian dream. And what is the Palestinian dream? It's from the river to the sea. So no one really wants to do it. I mean, it's all very political, and some of the Arab leaders, they want Israel to quietly get rid of Hamas, but I don't think that they're able to face up to the Muslim Brotherhood and radical Islamists on their own soil. I think that if the president of Egypt today were to say what he really thinks, he would not be president. Yeah.
Take one last question.
Okay.
Probably die, yeah.
Thank you so much for your intellect and courage. As a last question, can you please talk about what you would do, your thoughts about the UN, and if you could and were in charge of one of the democratic countries and had a voice, what you would advise?
Well, the United Nations is one of those great Western institutions founded on very high ideals that's now rotten to the core and has been for many years. Yeah, for many years. And I mean, I don't think that the government of Israel pays any attention to the UN, but if they do, they shouldn't pay any attention to the UN. Yeah. Yeah.